The earliest aircraft had no instruments. Pilots literally flew by the seat of their pants. That's not as outlandish as it might seem. With experience, pilots could develop a keen sense of the condition of their aircraft and the engine. Even today, it's important for pilots to develop the ability to feel what the aircraft is doing, by looking outside, sensing G-forces, and listening to the engine. As engines became more reliable and planes could fly higher and farther, new instruments were added to help pilots monitor flight conditions and navigate. There are three basic kinds of aircraft instruments classified by the job they perform: flight instruments, engine instruments, and navigation instruments. Aircraft instruments can also be classified according to their principle of operation: pressure instruments, mechanical instruments, and electrical instruments. Aircraft manufacturers eventually began following the convention of grouping the flight instruments together in a central position on the panel. This grouping became known as the six-pack. The airspeed indicator, vertical speed indicator, and altimeter form the core of the six-pack. These flight instruments operate by means of air pressure and together form the pitot static system. All three require access to ambient outside air that comes through the static port. The airspeed indicator alone requires ram air, which is channeled through the pitot tube during the forward motion of the aircraft. Certain critical speeds are marked on the face of the airspeed indicator, such as VS0, stall speed in landing configuration with gear and flaps extended; VS1, stall speed in clean configuration with the gear and flaps retracted; VFE, maximum flaps extended speed; VNO, the maximum normal operating speed; and VNE, the never exceed speed. The airspeed indicator works by comparing ram air channeled through the pitot tube to static air from the static port. The ram air pushes against a metal diaphragm, which is housed within a chamber exposed to static air pressure. The movement of the diaphragm is then registered by a needle on the face of the instrument. The faster the speed, the greater the movement of the diaphragm and the needle that is connected to it. If the pitot tube becomes blocked, the airspeed indicator will behave like an altimeter. In a climb, the reading on the airspeed indicator will increase, tempting the pilot to pull the nose up to slow the aircraft down. This can lead to a stall. In a descent, the reading will decrease, tempting the pilot to push the nose down. This can lead to excessive airspeed. Always verify a climb or descent by checking the attitude indicator. The altimeter consists of a sealed metal aneroid wafer filled with air that is enclosed inside a housing that is exposed to static air pressure from the outside. As the aircraft climbs or descends, pressure inside the housing decreases or increases, allowing the aneroid wafer to expand or contract. The movements of the aneroid wafer are then transferred to a needle that indicates altitude on the face of the gauge. The video that follows provides a good overview of the altimeter's inner mechanism.
Hey guys, John from FlyMikeAlpha.com, and today we're here to look at the inner workings of an altimeter. Basically, what is happening as we twist this little knob around and change the setting on our Kollsman window there, and what makes these needles or these hands spin around and indicate our altitude as the aircraft ascends or descends. So for starters, let's go ahead and disassemble our instrument here. If we look at the back side, that little hole there is where this sealed instrument, when it was sealed before we cut it all apart, that had a static line going to the back of it, which went to our static port on the outside of the aircraft, which measured ambient air pressure, static pressure. So as we take that apart and take the case off here, we get to see the inner workings, and the first thing I'll show you guys is basically what's happening when we twist this little knob here and change that setting in our Kollsman window for the local altimeter setting. Well, we know that when we move it about 1/10 of an inch, we should see about a 100-foot change in altitude like that. We use about 1/10 of an inch for 100 feet, or a general rule of thumb would be 1 inch for 1,000 feet. And so as we're turning this little Colesman knob here, or changing our setting in our Colesman window, not only are we moving this little round display there, we're also twisting the entire assembly of the instrument inside the casing. And by twisting that entire assembly of the instrument, what we're doing is moving the hands that are mounted to that instrument. So as we twist that whole assembly backwards, you can see the hand moving backwards, or we twist the whole assembly forward, the hand moves forward. And of course, as the hundreds hand moves, it moves the thousands hand and the 10,000s hand ever so slightly. So now let's look at what actually makes up the altimeter. It's a pretty simple looking instrument in here, but very sensitive with some very delicate parts. First off, we're talking about ambient air pressure. So we know that the pressure is less up high, and so as we ascend, there's less pressure. We have these two discs here that are sealed with gas inside them, and that gas is going to expand as the ambient air pressure, as the aircraft ascends, decreases. As the ambient air pressure is decreasing, these discs are expanding and applying pressure through this little armature here, which then moves our hands to indicate a higher altitude. We call these two little discs aneroid wafers, and you can see how little this armature moves to go from 0 all the way up to 15,000 feet. It moves barely 1/8 of an inch. So it's a very sensitive, delicate instrument, and you can see how the vibration of the engine over time is going to affect this negatively, and that's why we accept variations in the altimeter indication. Say when we have an altimeter setting of 2990 and we have that set up there, and we read, okay, we're at about 450 feet here, and field elevation is actually 400, well, we still accept that as a normal indication because it's within plus or minus 75 feet of field elevation, and we know that this thing is really delicate, and to get it to indicate 50 feet within field elevation is still, acceptable, pretty good. So these two very delicate aneroid wafers will expand as the aircraft ascends, push on that little armature there, and give you a higher reading. And you can see as this armature is pushed on, what it's really doing, it's turning these gears inside there. You can see that little guy down inside there with some teeth on them. And it spins those gears down inside there, which are all geared at different ratios to, of course, move your hundreds hand faster than your thousands hand, faster than your 10,000s hand. And this particular altimeter is really only good up to about 20,000 feet, and without forcing it, I get up to about 15,000 feet there or so. So there's 15,000. As I ease up there, 14,000, 13, 12, 11, back to 9, 8, 7, 6, and I'll just let go of it. So, very delicate instrument, and obviously we would never treat one like this if we were actually going to ever reuse it, but this altimeter has seen the extent of its life. But hopefully that gives you some good insight as to what's actually happening when you twist this little knob here. A lot of people, even some CFIs out there, don't know what is happening when you're twisting this little knob, and that in fact this entire assembly is rotating inside there to change the indication of your hundreds hand, your thousands hand, and your 10,000s hand. Also, something interesting to note here is that we have this little checker pattern here, that little stripe pattern, that'll kind of catch your attention to let you know that, yeah, that's 0 feet there, so literally 0 feet, MSL is what that's indicating. And then, although it looks very similar, that is 10,000 feet MSL, and it looks like 0 feet again, but notice the 10,000s hand is over at the 10, and part of that stripe pattern is covered up, and altitude is tilted, kind of giving you some clues that, hey, you're not at 0 feet, you're at 10,000 now. And that's obvious when you're in the aircraft, not, misread your altitude by 10,000 feet, but sometimes it'll get people on the written exam, so you definitely want to keep an eye out when they depict out pictures of altimeters on your written exam. They could easily give you, say, 12,000 feet, and it may look like 2,000 unless you're catching the fact that the 10,000s hand's over to the right, and this is in fact 12,000 feet indicated.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching, and thank you for all your support on Patreon. It is a huge help in making the dream of a comprehensive, free online ground school a reality. As always, if you have any questions at all, leave them in the comments below, and be sure to share us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, all the other social media sites, so your friends and family can find us and also take advantage of this great free resource. Be sure to give us a thumbs up on our video and subscribe to our channel to make sure that you keep up with all our latest episodes as they're released. And remember, if you can't fly every day, then fly 8mikealpha.com. We'll see you all next time.
As seen in the video, the altimeter setting can be adjusted using the Kollsman window. Continually adjusting the altimeter during flight is important in order to know the accurate altitude of the aircraft. Updated altimeter settings can be obtained over the radio from air traffic control. The altimeter measures true altitude, or the altitude of the aircraft above sea level. But there are other types of altitude that pilots should be aware of. Absolute altitude is the altitude of the aircraft above the surface. Pressure altitude is the altitude of the aircraft above a standard datum plane, which is determined when the Kollsman window is set to 29.92 inches of mercury. All aircraft flying 18,000 feet and higher are required to set their altimeters to 29.92 so that their exact altitude above the standard datum plane can be determined. This helps prevent collisions. Atmospheric pressure changes constantly. If an aircraft flies from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure without adjusting the altimeter setting, the altimeter will read lower than the actual altitude above sea level. This can pose a considerable danger of colliding with terrain or with other aircraft. Pilots use a handy saying to remember this principle: from high to low, look out below. The same principle applies when flying from an area of high temperature to low temperature. Remember the saying, from high to low, look out below. The vertical speed indicator is used to determine upward or downward trends in the flight path. A diaphragm is connected to the static port so that it is continually filled with ambient air. A calibrated leak in the housing allows the air inside to return to ambient pressure, but only after a brief delay. The diaphragm therefore expands or contracts as the aircraft climbs or descends, but then stabilizes as the pressure equalizes. The movements of the diaphragm are recorded by a needle on the gauge that moves up or down, but settles on zero when the aircraft is no longer climbing or descending. The attitude indicator is one of the most important flight instruments available to the pilot, especially when flying in the clouds. The brown and blue field on the face of the instrument represents the ground and the sky. These are connected to a gyro and gimbal system so that they maintain an accurate reference to the horizon. The miniature aircraft, which is fixed to the instrument, mimics the movement of the actual aircraft. Thus, it will pitch and roll against the background of the horizon portrayed on the face of the instrument, showing the pilot the orientation of the actual aircraft even when there is no outside visual reference. The heading indicator also uses a spinning gyro and gimbal system to provide a stable indicator of direction. It is meant to accompany the magnetic compass and should be periodically adjusted to match the direction indication shown on the compass. Once matched, it provides a more stable indication of direction than the compass since it is not subject to turning errors and won't bounce around in turbulence. The turn coordinator uses an electrically powered gyro mounted on a canted gimbal to provide an indication of rate of roll and rate of turn. The following video shows how it works.
Hey guys, John from FlyMikeAlpha.com, and today we're looking at the inner workings of a turn coordinator. So we can see we have an electric motor inside there spinning that brass gimbal or that brass weight around, and that is giving us a gyroscopic force. And you can see that although when we tilt this left and right we get a little bit of indication as towards our bank, it's really more about when the whole aircraft changes its heading, showing us the rate of turn. So if I turn this very slowly to the right, I see a small rate of turn. If I turn it faster to the right, I see a greater rate. And it's just the tendency of that gyro inside there to resist the turning motion and in turn turn it in towards a tilting motion that we read on our instrument. So it's an electrically driven instrument. We're relying on electricity to spin our electric motor there. And as that electric motor spins, it spins that brass weight, which gives us rigidity in space. And that rigidity in space is what gives this instrument its ability to tell us our bank or rate of turn information. Of course, we have the little red flag showing there because we have it unplugged from the electrical source. But when we plug it back in, that little flag would go away. So it is totally possible to have that little flag gone, have electricity provided to this instrument, and not have the instrument working at all, because although electricity may be provided to make that little flag go away, the motor itself could burn up, or basically the brushes could get old, and that's exactly what happened to this one, and that's why it's being pulled out of the aircraft and replaced with a brand new model. This one just has run for thousands of hours from 1991 till now, and had plenty of black dirt from the worn out brushes when we pulled it out. So basically, you can see just your normal electric motor in there with your brushes, and then your weight on this side, and just that tendency of the weight to spin around and very fast creates a gyroscopic force that gives you your bank information. And of course, our ball works regardless. That's simply just a slip skid indicator that as there's centrifugal force, or in this case, just normal gravity, pulling the ball one way or another, it's going to indicate. So the ball does not need electricity or vacuum to run, and this little instrument is, just as it says at the top there, DC electric, no pitch information, just bank information.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much for sharing us on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other social media sites. If you have any questions about the video at all, just leave them in the comments below and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Be sure to give us a thumbs up on our video, and you can subscribe to us to keep up with all our latest episodes right over here on the right. Also, check out some of these other helpful videos below, and remember, if you can't fly every day, then fly at MikeAlpha.com. We'll see y'all next time.
In addition to the flight instruments in the 6-pack, there are various engine instruments that help the pilot to monitor the condition of the engine. These include manifold pressure and RPMs, cylinder head temperature and exhaust gas temperature, and oil pressure and temperature. Most aircraft also have an array of navigation instruments, such as a VOR receiver and GPS unit. Many of the traditional aircraft instruments are now incorporated into advanced glass panel displays that portray the information in a digital format. These systems are very reliable, since they don't rely on mechanical movement. However, they can be confusing to pilots who have not practiced with the digital screen interface. Learning how to work with electronic flight displays during initial flight training is a good idea, since all modern airliners now incorporate them into the flight decks. The next slides provide some practice FAA exam questions about instruments.